Mowing your lawn shouldn't be controversial. But for me, it turned into a full-blown criminal investigation. It was a quiet Saturday morning. I was out front, earbuds in, pushing my mower, just trying to take care of my property like any other homeowner. Then two men in tactical-style vests showed up, no marked vehicle, no visible badges, and started barking orders. They claimed to be part of community enforcement, said I was violating some made-up noise ordinance, and demanded to see ID. But something was off, so I did what they never expected. I pulled out my phone, and I called a real sheriff. 6 minutes later, the squad cars rolled up, and the only people answering questions weren't me. They were the imposters the HOA had sent to intimidate me. That day, everything changed. For me, and for them. Moving to a new neighborhood is supposed to feel like a fresh start. A chance to plant roots, build something of your own, and escape the noise of the world. But sometimes, when you're one of the few black homeowners in a mostly white community, it feels like you're moving into someone else's story, not your own. I bought my house with the goal of peace. It wasn't a mansion, but it had space, plenty of it. A modest home on a quiet street. A small front lawn, just enough to care for, and a backyard perfect for grilling with friends and family. I was excited. It was my dream to finally have a place to call home without anyone's rules but my own. The HOA? They weren't my concern. At first, they weren't anything to worry about. I kept my property well maintained, mowing the lawn regularly, trimming the hedges, keeping the garage in order. I was just like everyone else. Or at least, that's how I saw it. Until the morning, I decided to mow the lawn. It was a typical Saturday, the sun shining just enough to make you want to be outside. I had my headphones on, listening to music while I worked, just trying to get the lawn in shape before the heat of the day hit. My mind wasn't on much, just the familiar rhythm of pushing the mower back and forth. But then, I heard footsteps. I looked up to see two men in tactical vests walking down the street toward me. They didn't look like normal residents or neighbors I recognized. They were wearing those vests like they had a job to do. They were too serious for a random encounter. One of them waved me down. "Hey, you need to stop that," he said, motioning toward my mower. I stopped immediately. "Excuse me." He walked toward me with authority I hadn't expected. "You're violating neighborhood codes," he said, looking at the mower and then back at me. "This is against the quiet hour code." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" He didn't explain, just kept repeating that I was violating the quiet hour code. It was too early to mow, apparently. And now, they were here to enforce it. Something didn't feel right. These men weren't wearing badges or uniforms, and there were no vehicles around that marked them as officers or even part of any official enforcement. They weren't from the city or county sheriff's department. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Something felt wrong, but I wasn't sure what. I knew my rights, but I wasn't about to escalate it with them, at least not without being sure of what was going on. "Who are you?" I asked. "What agency are you with?" "We're neighborhood enforcement," the first man said, holding up a clipboard with no official insignia. "We handle things around here. We've had complaints about your lawn, and this is a violation." I didn't know what was happening. I felt my pulse quicken as my mind raced through the possibilities. Were they truly from the HOA? Was this some kind of private security? Was it even legal for them to stop me like this? But the truth was, I had no idea who they were. They didn't have badges. They didn't have any kind of real authority, and yet they were standing there demanding my ID. Something inside me snapped. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "You're going to need to show me some identification or get off my property," I said, trying to sound firm but not confrontational. "Who exactly do you work for?" The second man stepped forward, now visibly frustrated. "We don't need to answer to you. You're violating the rules, and we're here to enforce them. Give us your ID." At that moment, I felt the tension rise, the air thickening with the feeling of being controlled. It was like they didn't see me as just a homeowner trying to maintain his property. They saw me as someone to be policed, someone to be made to obey without question. That's when I called the real cops. I dialed the sheriff's office, calmly explaining what was happening. "Yes, I have two individuals on my property claiming to be neighborhood enforcement. They're demanding my ID, and I'm not sure who they are. They're not showing me badges or any kind of legitimate authority. I need an officer to come and verify who they are, I said into the phone. I didn't give him a chance to argue. I stayed on the line with dispatch and kept recording. I wasn't about to let these men walk all over me just because they were hiding behind fake uniforms. I could hear their voices behind me, growing louder as I spoke to the dispatcher. They were demanding again that I provide ID. I'm calling the real cops, I said, louder now, holding my phone high so they could see the recording. One of the men started walking back toward his truck, which was parked up the street. He was mumbling under his breath about how I was making things difficult and wasting everyone's time. The other man stood silently, glancing nervously between me and the phone. Within minutes, I heard sirens. The real sheriff's department arrived. When the deputies pulled up, the situation changed in an instant. The men in tactical vests were now visibly uncomfortable. They stood there for a second, unsure of how to handle real law enforcement standing between them and the homeowner. One of the deputies approached me. "What's going on here?" I explained the situation, showing the recording I'd taken. I pointed out the lack of official identification, the clipboard with no agency name, and the fact that these men were blocking my driveway over something that wasn't even a real violation. The deputies turned to the two men. "What agency are you two with?" one deputy asked. "We're just neighborhood enforcers," the first man said, avoiding eye contact. "We're just making sure everyone follows the rules around here." The deputy raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, but you're not authorized to be on private property without identification or permission. You're not law enforcement." The men looked at each other, realizing their bluff had been called. After a few moments of uncomfortable silence, one of the deputies turned to me. "Do you want to press charges for harassment or impersonation?" I thought about it for a second. This wasn't about the lawn anymore. It was about something bigger. About who gets to enforce rules in a neighborhood. About the right to feel safe in your own home. "Yeah," I said. "I want to press charges." The deputies took over from there. They questioned the men, checked their IDs, and confirmed that neither of them had any official standing with the HOA or the neighborhood. In fact, one of them wasn't even local. That was the turning point. Not just for me, but for the entire neighborhood. The HOA was exposed. The fake enforcers they sent to intimidate me were no longer part of their operation. The sheriff's department had confirmed the whole thing was a setup. And Karen? She was now the one on the receiving end of real legal scrutiny. When the deputies confirmed those two men weren't law enforcement, I knew it wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a setup. They hadn't come to enforce noise rules. They had come to intimidate me, and probably thought no one would question it. But they didn't count on me recording them. They didn't count on me calling real law enforcement. And they definitely didn't count on what would happen next. Because I wasn't going to let this go. Not just for me. For everyone else they might have tried this with. The very next day, I filed a formal report with the sheriff's department, citing impersonation of law enforcement, unlawful harassment, and attempted trespass under false pretenses. The deputies backed my story with written witness statements. Their report confirmed the men wore tactical gear and approached under color of authority, without a legal right to do so. That alone was a serious offense. But I didn't stop there. I filed a second report, this time with the county attorney's office, asking them to investigate the HOA's role. Because I had a strong feeling these two neighborhood enforcers weren't acting alone. And I was right. I started digging. The HOA's website wasn't much, just a couple links and a calendar of neighborhood meetings. But there was a backdoor I didn't expect, a private forum for residents only, the kind you had to log into. But like most poorly maintained websites, all it took was a little guesswork. Usernames were just email addresses. Passwords? Most were default or easy to reset. Once inside, I didn't just find discussions about gardening and pool codes. I found Karen's name, HOA president, and I found a message thread titled Community Enforcement and Watch Program. It was a smoking gun. One thread, from just 2 weeks prior, had this message from someone signed KW, Karen Wellington, considering hiring neighborhood patrol to deal with some of the more disruptive residents. We can't let things get out of hand. I've spoken with someone who has private enforcement experience. Shouldn't cost much if we don't go through official channels. Another board member replied, "Maybe we can do this quietly." better than getting law enforcement involved unless we have to. Then someone else chimed in. People like that need to be reminded they're guests in this community. People like that. 3 words. But they said everything. I took screenshots of the entire thread. Dozens of posts. Some vague. Some explicit. Another member asked, "Is this about the new homeowner on Elm?" And Karen's reply, "Let's just say he hasn't gotten the message yet." My stomach turned. I had suspected racial bias before, but now I had proof. And once you see it in writing, there's no pretending it's just about noise complaints or landscaping violations. It was targeted, it was planned, and it was personal. That's when I started talking to neighbors. Not all of them were friendly at first. A few avoided eye contact. Some said they didn't want to get involved. But the moment I mentioned what had happened to me, and that I had proof that the HOA president was hiring fake enforcement, people started opening up. A Latino family 3 houses down said they'd gotten a warning about their fence color from someone in a vest with no badge. An older Asian couple said a man knocked on their door late at night, saying he was there to check for code violations. No vahis, no paperwork, no reason, and none of them ever called the cops. They thought it was real. They thought they had no choice but to comply. I asked if they'd ever reported it. "No," one neighbor said. "We just didn't want trouble." I understood that fear all too well. But now, I had something they did in video, audio, and screenshots. And it was time to let the right people see it. I turned everything over to the sheriff's office and the county attorney. The reports, the forum posts, the quotes, the screenshots. They were stunned. The deputy I'd spoken to originally called me back personally. "I'm going to be honest," he said. "We didn't realize how deep this went. This is coordinated impersonation and possibly a civil rights violation." He assured me they were opening an investigation, not just into the impersonators, but into the HOA board's entire conduct. That was a victory, but the next one came even faster. A local news outlet picked up the story. The headline? HOA accused of sending fake officers to intimidate black homeowner. County investigates. The story went viral in the region. They ran clips of my phone recording, blurring the faces of the fake officers but clearly showing their tactical vests and aggressive posture. The news report included excerpts from the HOA forum, including Karen's comment about people like that. The response was immediate. People from other communities started commenting. One wrote, "I've seen this happen before. Quiet intimidation pretending to be law. So glad someone's standing up." Another said, "Time for this HOA to go." And everyone liked it. Even former residents chimed in, describing similar patterns from Karen's earlier term on the board. Within a week, the county attorney issued a public statement confirming the men involved were not licensed private security. No permits were filed for any patrol activity. The HOA had no authority to dispatch individuals in a law enforcement capacity. And the comments made in internal HOA communications raised serious concerns of discriminatory practices and abuse of authority. Karen tried to go silent. No public statements, no meetings, but her name was now everywhere. And her title, HOA President, was followed in every article by under investigation. The real turning point came when I attended the next neighborhood meeting. Not as a guest, not as a victim, but as someone with receipts. The room was packed. Some faces were sympathetic, others uncomfortable, but all eyes turned when I pulled out a binder and placed it on the table. "This," I said, "is what happens when an HOA stops enforcing rules and starts acting like a shadow police department." I opened to the forum screenshots, then the complaint filings, then the neighbor testimonies I had gathered with their permission. No one interrupted, not even Karen, who sat silently in the back, pale and trembling. When I was done, I said one final thing. I move here to live in peace. I have the same rights as anyone else. And if anyone else feels they've been intimidated by this board, now is the time to speak. One by one, residents stood up, a young mother, an elderly veteran, 2 black homeowners who had never attended a meeting before. By the end of that night, the board wasn't just exposed. It was fractured. They thought they could scare me. Instead, they triggered a legal avalanche that crushed their entire operation. By the time the sheriff's department wrapped up their investigation, it was no longer a question of if the HOA would face consequences. It was a matter of how severe they'd be. And trust me, the sheriff wasn't playing. The official report came in just days after the neighborhood meeting. It confirmed the two men were not licensed security personnel. The HOA had no authority to employ or deploy enforcement agents. The encounter on my lawn constituted unlawful impersonation of law enforcement. Their actions bordered on attempted detainment without cause. The deputies had seen enough, and that's when the citations dropped. $10,000 in civil fines directly issued to the HOA, $5,000 for impersonating officers, $2,500 for trespassing under false authority, $2,500 for initiating enforcement without licenses or city-approved contracts. The fines weren't just punitive, they were symbolic. A public record that said, "This happened, and it's illegal." But I wasn't done. With the sheriff's backing, I met with my attorney and filed a civil complaint against the HOA, and specifically against Karen Wellington, HOA president. Our claims: intentional infliction of emotional distress, harassment based on racial bias, attempted detainment, abuse of power, conspiracy to intimidate under false authority. We submitted screenshots from the HOA forum, my recorded video, and sworn statements from neighbors. My lawyer was calm, confident, and clear. She targeted you because she thought no one would fight back. Now, she's going to learn what accountability looks like. Karen's response? Full-on damage control. She sent a neighborhood-wide email claiming the two men were independent contractors, not affiliated directly with the HOA, and that they were never instructed to intimidate or impersonate law enforcement. She painted it all as a misunderstanding. We regret any confusion caused by recent security efforts and are committed to reviewing all policies going forward. It was weak, hollow, especially since I had screenshots of her literally suggesting it in writing. Worse, her attempt to play innocent backfired because residents started forwarding her email to the local news outlet that broke the story. And that's when things exploded. The headline changed from local concern to statewide scandal. HOA sends fake cops to harass black homeowner. Claims it was just security gone wrong. They didn't hold back. They showed the full recording. They quoted the sheriff's report. They ran side-by-side comparisons between my civil complaint and Karen's internal forum posts. They even dug into her past HOA campaigns, revealing a history of selective enforcement, mostly targeting new residents, renters, and people of color. Public opinion swung hard. On social media, people were furious. This isn't a mistake. This is how racism hides behind rules. How many people have they done this to who didn't have the courage to fight back? He did everything right. They tried to ruin him over mowing his lawn. Local civil rights organizations reached out, offering support. Attorneys messaged me to say, "If you need co-counsel, we're in." One tweet, showing a clip of the fake officers being questioned by deputies, got over 1 million views in 48 hours. I wasn't just some guy with a lawnmower anymore. I was now the face of someone who fought back and brought the whole lie crashing down. Karen, meanwhile, went quiet again. But it didn't matter, because the more she said nothing, the louder the facts became. And now, the HOA board had to deal with more than my lawsuit. Residents started demanding full financial transparency, independent review of all citations issued in the last 3 years, a vote of no confidence in the current board. Someone even created a change.org petition titled, "Hold Karen Wellington and the HOA accountable for racial harassment and abuse of power." It had thousands of signatures in a week. By the time our first court date arrived, the HOA had already burned through 2 law firms. No one wanted to defend them, not after reading what they did. Karen showed up wearing a pale beige suit and a look of forced regret. She didn't say a word in court. Her attorney tried to claim it was a miscommunication, that there was no intent to harass. The judge interrupted him. "Your client empowered unlicensed individuals to confront a man on his own property. This isn't a miscommunication. It's a violation of civil rights." I didn't need to say anything. The law was speaking for me now. The civil case proceeded. Slow but steady. Depositions were scheduled. More neighbors came forward. One woman, who had received a fine for excessive front porch decor, testified that Karen had knocked on her door and told her, "This neighborhood has a look we're trying to maintain." She was the only black woman on her street. Another man described how he was fined 3 times in a month for unregistered plants after attending a meeting where he disagreed with Karen on budget allocations. Every story was different, but the pattern? It was exactly the same. My lawyer leaned over to me after one of those depositions and whispered, "She's not just going to lose this case. She's going to lose everything." And she did. Within weeks of our case going public, the State Housing Board launched its own inquiry, not just into our HOA, but into several others Karen had worked with over the years. The media kept digging. They uncovered that the 2 fake officers she hired had worked with other HOAs in the past, using similar intimidation tactics. Karen's name was tied to all of it. Her reputation was ruined. She wasn't just unpopular. She was now unhireable, untrusted, and under investigation. And me? I just kept mowing my lawn. Every Saturday. Same time. Same boots. Same mower. Except now, neighbors waved when they passed. Kids on bikes smiled and said hi. One older gentleman pulled over in his truck and said, "Thanks for doing what you did. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us." By the time the civil case entered discovery, the real damage to the HOA had already been done. Not by lawyers, not by lawsuits, but by the truth. Truth has a strange way of filling a room. And after what happened with the fake cops, Karen's room, once filled with smug compliance and nervous silence, was now packed with open eyes and loud voices. At the very next HOA meeting, there wasn't a single empty seat. People came with printed copies of the news articles. One man stood up and read aloud the sheriff's findings. "You authorized unlicensed enforcement and attempted to silence a homeowner with intimidation. That's not leadership, it's lawlessness." A woman next to him added, "We trusted you, and you sent people in tactical gear to confront a neighbor mowing his lawn. How is that defensible?" Karen tried to speak. She started with her usual, "Let's not turn this into a witch hunt." But this time, the room erupted. "You are the witch. Step down. How many others have you harassed and silenced?" A vote of no confidence was called, right then and there. Karen refused. But within 72 hours, 2 board members resigned publicly, citing irreconcilable differences and a loss of faith in the current president's judgment. The treasurer followed a day later. And Karen? She didn't resign. She just stopped showing up. But the damage had already triggered something bigger, a county-level ethics probe into the HOA's operation. It was prompted by multiple resident complaints, the sheriff's report, my civil lawsuit, and the forum messages I'd turned over to the county attorney's office. The county's Office of Neighborhood Governance sent an investigator to review everything from citation records to board elections. And what they found was damning. HOA meetings with no recorded minutes. Citations issued without evidence. Fines disproportionately levied against people of color, renters, and newer residents. A complete absence of third-party audits. Karen's little empire of authority wasn't just unethical. It was illegally operated. That's when the neighborhood truly changed. With Karen effectively gone and the board half empty, people who had never spoken up before started organizing. It started with a Facebook group called Our HOA, Our Voice. Then came yard signs. Reform Our HOA. No more silence. Rights over rules. And then a new coalition, the Neighborhood Unity Committee, built around transparency, inclusivity, and fairness. They reached out to me privately and asked something I never expected. "Would you speak at our first open town meeting?" I hesitated. I didn't want to become that guy, the face of every HOA argument, the headline activist. But then I remembered every neighbor who'd whispered, "Thank you," in passing. Every homeowner who told me they'd been afraid to speak up for years. Every person who looked like me and felt like they didn't belong until they saw me fight back. So I agreed. The town meeting was held in the community park pavilion. There were folding chairs, lemonade stands, and nervous energy. I stepped up to the mic and looked out at the crowd. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about what they let happen, what they watched happen, and what they were finally ready to change. I didn't give a speech. I told a story of mowing my lawn, of being stopped by strangers in tactical vests, of recording, calling, and waiting for the real law to show up, of discovering the web Karen had woven behind the scenes. And then I ended with this. I'm not here to tear this neighborhood down. I'm here to make sure no one else has to live under a fake badge or fear disguised as policy. If we build anything from this moment, it better be something real, because I'm not moving, and I'm not backing down. The applause wasn't explosive. It was steady, sincere, long, and it was enough. A week later, the remaining board members called for a complete reset. Special elections were held. Bylaws were rewritten with clear limits on board authority. All enforcement actions now required verified evidence and an independent third-party check. Private security programs were banned permanently. And finally, after 6 weeks of silence, the HOA issued a formal written apology. It was posted on their website and hand-delivered to each home. We acknowledge and regret the recent incident involving unlicensed individuals confronting a homeowner under the false claim of authority. We further acknowledge that actions taken under the previous board's direction were improper, discriminatory, and not reflective of the values this community holds. We apologize without condition. Was it perfect? No, but it was public. And more importantly, it was too late to undo what had already begun. Because now, the neighborhood wasn't afraid anymore. People who used to whisper started speaking. Homeowners who hid behind closed blinds now asked questions at every meeting. One resident started a podcast on HOA reform. Another launched a watchdog site to track board decisions and public complaints. Even local officials got involved, suggesting legislation to require background checks and licensing for any HOA that wished to employ enforcement personnel. My story was no longer just a cautionary tale. It was a case study. Karen? She sold her home quietly 3 months later, moved 2 towns over. Rumor is she tried to get on another HOA board. Didn't get past the application phase. Someone sent them a link to the news story. As for me, I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to mow my lawn. Now I do. Every Saturday. Same boots. Same rhythm. And every now and then, someone passing by gives me a wave, not just out of politeness, but out of respect. They know the story. They know the fight. And they know exactly what kind of power it takes to stand in your yard, say enough, and change an entire neighborhood with one phone call. And the truth that in the months that followed, something incredible happened. The neighborhood didn't just survive the scandal. It transformed. With Karen gone and the old guard removed, a new board was elected. This time through a fair, open, and highly attended vote. The candidates ran on a unified platform. Equity, transparency, zero tolerance for abuse. There are no flashy promises. No fiat, just a shared commitment to make sure what happened to me, what had nearly happened to others, could never happen again. The first motion the new board passed: disband the neighborhood security program permanently. There would be no more road patrols, no more unlicensed enforcers, and absolutely no more intimidation dressed up as community protection. With the threat gone, the fear started to fade. People who once avoided one another began talking again. Some apologized. Others listened. Block parties started up again. Porch lights stayed on later. Parents let their kids play in the yards a little longer. The neighborhood slowly healed itself, not because of rules, but because of shared experience and the wake-up call they never saw coming. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. I kept to myself for the most part. I wasn't interested in parading around like a hero. I didn't need my name on a plaque or a shout out at a town hall. But when a neighbor had a question about HOA bylaws, they'd ask me. When someone got a suspicious notice on their door, they'd knock on mine. And when the local university hosted a forum on fair housing and discrimination in suburban HOAs, they asked if I'd speak. So I did, quietly, respectfully, and with one message. The rules aren't the problem. The problem is who decides how they're used, and whether those decisions are driven by fear, power, or control. The law isn't just about what's written. It's about who it protects, and it should protect everyone. That clip was shared across fair housing networks. They didn't call me a victim. They called me a neighbor who stood up. I still mow my lawn every Saturday. Same time, same boots. It's never been about how short the grass is. It's about what it stands for. Because now, in this community, that neatly trimmed lawn has come to mean something else. It's a symbol of resilience, of ownership, of dignity that doesn't need permission. And every time the mower starts up, it's a quiet reminder to everyone who walks or drives by. We're still here, and we're not going anywhere. Sometimes mowing your lawn is just mowing your lawn. And sometimes it's the moment the mask comes off an entire system. When two men in tactical vests stepped onto my lawn, pretending to be law enforcement, they weren't just trying to stop me from cutting grass. They were trying to send a message that I didn't belong, that my rights were optional, that fear could replace facts. But they picked the wrong house. Because I didn't back down. I hit record. I made the call. And I let the real law do its job. In the days that followed, the lies unraveled, the board fell apart, and the truth stood taller than any fence or fine they tried to throw at me. I didn't just mow my lawn. I exposed their game. So if someone tries to intimidate you, if they show up with fake badges, fake rules, or fake power, don't argue. Document. Report. Stand your ground. Because real justice doesn't wear a clipboard. And you don't need to shout when you've got the facts. They thought I'd stay quiet. But now, the only thing quiet is the lawnmower. And the only thing loud is the truth. If they send pretend cops to your door, make sure the next badge they see has real authority behind it. And the citation has their name at the top.